Hey everyone, Carlo here with AYCB, and today I'm reviewing Tiny Towns, which was designed by Peter McPherson. It's actually his debut game, and published by AEG. This is a game for 1 to 6 players that takes only about 45 minutes to play. It's a city building game where you have a 4x4 grid that represents your little town, and you're filling that with resources and converting those resources into buildings and trying to squeeze as much as you can into this tiny space. If you don't know how to play yet, check out our How to Play video. And if you do, then stick around and let me tell you what I think about Tiny Towns. Tiny Towns was actually one of my favorite games of 2019. I think it was overlooked quite a bit in a lot of the recent awards talk and nominations for other games, especially when you consider the fact that this was Peter McPherson's debut game. I have to mention it was also developed by Josh Wood, who designed Cat Lady, which we really like. I mean, first off, when you look at it, the presentation is beautiful. The illustrations on the cards are really nice. There's all these cute little animal critters, all kinds of different locations. Like just staring across the cards brings you quite a bit of joy. The building components here, all the wooden components, are of excellent quality. They're all kind of uniquely shaped. Minor issues with them here and there, which I'll get to later, but overall it's just a beautiful package. I really like this whole spatial puzzle that you're working with, this restriction of this 4x4 grid. First, second turn, it might seem like you think you're in a good spot, you have a lot of room, and within a few turns you quickly see how restrictive it is and how boxed in you feel, and the decisions are approaching agonizing almost every single turn, especially when someone else is calling a resource that you don't want to take and you're figuring out where to put it, just trying to think of some way to use it later on. I really like the way player interaction is done. Some games sometimes it's just like you draw a card that says like your opponent loses points or destroy your opponent's building or something like that. And I often don't like those because it just feels like an arbitrary kind of lazy way to throw in a, hey, bring the leader down a few points so that it's a closer game. In Tiny Towns, what you're doing that hurts your opponents is also gaining you a resource. So I found that even players that I play with who don't normally like mean player interaction in games quickly start to pick up on what is the right move in terms of picking something that, yeah, sure, maybe I can use this stone. It's not great for me, but if all my other opponents really don't want it, I'm going to pick stone and make them take it. And I really like that because it forces you to be aware of what people are doing, but you don't feel mean or malicious that you're targeting a specific person. So I have to say big credit for how the player interaction is done here. I also like how even when you don't win, it's satisfying to build your town, to see it come together. Even when you fail and you place something in the wrong spot, a lot of the time you can kind of look back on it and laugh, and you also can often pinpoint where you went wrong and exactly on what turn or with what resource. In some ways it can be a little unforgiving. I've had games where I realized I made a mistake on turn 3. I didn't realize till halfway into the game, and then I kind of realized, oh well, the game's kind of out of my control now, I'm not going to win. But so sometimes you do have to play through and it's a little unforgiving. I don't really consider that a negative. I think it accurately rewards you for excellent planning, but it also punishes you when you make a mistake, and I kind of like that. It's fair. The other thing I really like is the kind of balance between strategy and tactics. So think of a game like Dominion, where you have a kind of menu of cards, and when the game starts you're kind of looking at all the cards available and trying to plan out your strategy. Similar thing going on here. Every game's going to have a different collection of buildings available. So at the beginning of the game, you can kind of look around, form a game plan, and think, okay, those two buildings go really well together. I'm going to focus on a strategy that's really heavy on this one type of building, and maybe these ones I'm going to try and put in the corners, and you're trying to plan that out. But as the game goes on, your strategy just gets messed up by the other players so much, and you're forced to constantly pivot and make use of the resources that you're giving you. So there's always these tactical adjustments you have to make along the way, but you're always trying to stay on that path that you set out from your initial strategy as much as possible. There are some things I don't like about it. It's not a perfect game, but honestly my criticisms are pretty minimal. The first one is that the monument cards, maybe it's tough to say. I've played about 10 or 12 times. Some of them maybe seem like they're a little stronger or weaker than others. And the other thing is that some of them sort of encourage you to play the game in a different way that either doesn't seem fun or just seems a little counterintuitive to the rules. For example, the obelisk of the crescent says, you may place all future buildings on any empty square on your town. So this means once you construct that monument, for the rest of the game, any building that you place ignores the regular placement rules of having to go where one of those resources was. Now, even though it might be balanced out by the fact that this monument doesn't give you any points, whereas a lot of them do, it still reminds me of kind of an important lesson I learned from reading from the designer of Guillotine. So in Guillotine, long story short, there's a row of cards, and throughout the game there's all sorts of abilities that you're able to do to manipulate the order of these cards. But one of the cards in the game says, once you play this, no one can change the order of the cards in the line. And I remember the designer saying years after the game came out that he realized that he didn't like the design of that card because it basically was telling players to play the game in a way that fundamentally went against the basic rules of the game. It's all about changing the order of the cards, and this card says you can't do that. And that's kind of what this feels like in Tiny Towns. You know, you have this really compelling restriction that makes your turns interesting, that makes the game interesting and challenging, and you're basically saying, we're not going to give you any points for this, but for the rest of the game you can place your stuff wherever you want. The other thing, in terms of the wooden components, some of them are a little bit, you know, have little shapes that are maybe get broken easily or get chipped off or whatever, so pretty minor complaint there. The other thing is that because this game does go up to 6 players, some of these buildings you might run out of at playing at higher player counts. And it says in the rules, you know, that there's supposed to be an infinite supply of these, so just use an adequate replacement. But it feels like when there's this many pieces and they're so nice and colorful, you're not going to really enjoy putting some random like coin or token to represent this big red wooden building or something. So I do wish there were a bit more of the buildings so that you wouldn't run into that issue. Back to the player count for a second. It says 1 to 6 on the box, but because of the master builder mechanic, the solo version, while it can be fun to build your own puzzle, it kind of takes away from the that interesting player interaction. And then I find that playing with 5 or 6 is a bit much to keep track of, and also if you're only the master builder once every 5 or 6 turns, nobody's really going to be able to do what they want with their town, so it'll be pretty tough. I found the sweet spot tends to be 3 or 4 players, even 2 it works super well. So yeah, I think of it more as a 2 to 4 player game that, you know, you can play solo or include more players if you really want, but I'd stick to 2 to 4. Either way, fantastic game, highly recommend Tiny Towns. If you haven't given it a shot yet, definitely go for it. And be aware that AEG actually sometimes has these town hall variant games online where you can join in, sometimes with hundreds of players. So yeah, keep an eye out for those. You can also check out my full written review on our website at allyoucanboard.com. And as I said, keep an eye out for our content on the Tiny Towns expansion Fortune coming up. Thanks again for watching, and see you next time.